What is the creepiest, scariest, strangest, unexplained experience story you've had, heard, or know? Story 1. I grew up on the west coast of Ireland, in County Galway. One night when I was around 16 years of age, I woke up in the middle of a fucking gale, with rain pelting the windows and wind whistling through the cracks. Now, on this night, there was only meself and the mother, and the sisters inside in the house, as the father was. Story 2. I've shared this story before, and this still creeps me the hell out. Growing up, there was this girl who always freaked the fudge out of the other neighborhood kids. For example, she told all the girls that in the forest behind her house, there were dead, bloody people in it. All the kids freaked out and told their parents, which resulted in all the dads doing a search in the forest, only to find hot pocket wrappers and empty beer bottles. After that, all the neighborhood kids refused to go near her, including me. A few years later, my parents got a divorce. The day that the movers came to my dad's house to get my mom's stuff out, the girl comes out of nowhere. She said that Matt didn't like that my parents were getting a divorce. My dad ended up telling me that Matt was her imaginary friend that was often too physical. Even though I stopped being friends with her, her parents were still friends with my dad. Her parents told my dad that Matt could control the lights, even making the power go out one time. Matt also knocked on doors at night, but if he was ignored, the banging on the doors would start. 2 years after my parents' divorce, my dad decided that he would invite that whole family over to catch up. I was begging my dad not to, but he said it would be nice. So when they came over, my dad said to show the girl my bedroom since I got a new TV. I show her to my room and she is acting normal and complimenting my room. I was still creeped out because she just sat on the floor while I tried to put a movie into my DVD player. And I shoot you not, but out of nowhere, mid-conversation, in the most deadpan voice, she said, "Matt's here." At that exact moment, the lights flickered and I ran out of my room crying. Her parents ran into my room and dragged their daughter out and went home. I refused to sleep in my bedroom for weeks. I haven't heard much from that family ever since then. I heard that Matt still controlled the lights, but I don't know if he is still around. Even to this day, when the lights flicker or a bulb breaks, I still freak out. Answer: electrician here. Lights flickering is usually a loose wire when the screw hasn't been tightened good in the light, switch, or the fuse. That can actually lead to small electric shorts between a metal body and the live wire, and those small sparks can sometimes be hot enough to set fire to the cable insulator. TLDR, call an electrician to perform an exorcism for you. Story 3. On the morning of my mother's funeral, I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to socialize or thank people for coming. As I lay there, I felt the bed compress as if someone sat on it. I swear she was telling me one last time to get the fudge up before I'm late. Answer: my dad came to me after he died as well. He had been a struggling artist all of his adult life. After he and my mom divorced, he lived alone in a run-down house for about 20 years until he died unexpectedly from a heart attack in his bathroom. He was found the following Monday when his co-workers called me because he hadn't shown up for work. My father had become quite a hoarder during those years, and cleaning out his house after he died was a massive undertaking. One afternoon, a few weeks after he had passed, I was all alone at his house going through his things and cleaning up. I walked out to the enclosed front porch where we had been putting out contractor bags full of trash to be hauled away. There must have been 30 bags out there. I just stood out there looking around at all of the bags when something just came over me. That's the only way I know to describe it. I walked to one particular bag in the midst of all the others and opened it up. Right there on the top was one of my father's original watercolors he had painted many years before. Someone had accidentally put it in the trash, and I knew that was him telling me to find it before it was lost forever. I had no reason to go open that one bag, but I just did. His art was his life's passion, and for one of his pieces to get thrown away would have broken his heart and mine. Story 4. I was about 11 when this happened, and it remains one of the scariest things that has ever happened to me. I grew up in rural Ireland, and our house was the last of 4 houses located on this country lane. I used to get the bus home from school every day, and ordinarily the bus driver would drop me at the top of the lane, and I would walk the rest of the mile or so to my house. This day was no different. I jumped off the bus and started making my way down the road towards the house. I was about halfway down the road when I heard a car driving up behind me. I stood in off the road on the grassy verge, and the car slowed down to a stop beside me. I didn't recognize the car at all or the man in it, and I remember thinking instantly that something wasn't right. This is a rural area. Everyone knows everyone, and strangers stick out like a sore thumb. The guy rolls down the window and says, "Hi, Karen. Do you want a lift the rest of the way?" My name is not Karen, so now I know for sure that this guy is up to no good. I tell him that isn't my name and say that I'm grand anyway, I can walk. He just sort of nodded at me and didn't say anything else, so I just started walking on away from the car. I was really nervous at this point. I didn't look behind me, but I hadn't heard the car reversing or driving away, so I just assumed he was sitting there watching me walk. After a few more meters, I look behind me and I see that he has gotten out of his car and is walking after me. I took off, running up the road. I could hear him running after me, and it suddenly occurred to me that my parents probably wouldn't be home from work yet, and my brother, who was older than me, was probably still in school, so I would be alone in the house. That's when I started crying. I finally reached our driveway, ran up and around to the back of the house, and burst into the kitchen to find, lo and behold, my brother sitting at the kitchen table, eating toast. He had skived off school for the afternoon. At this point, my heart felt like it was going to come through my chest, and I was so out of breath from running and crying that I could hardly even explain to him what was wrong except that there was a man. My brother played one of the national sports in Ireland during his teenage years and grabbed his hurley, an Irish version of a baseball bat, to simplify things. He ran outside with it to find this man at the bottom of our driveway. He went down to confront him, but the man took one look at my brother and the hurley, turned and booked it out of there. We told our parents, who reported it to the cops, but nothing ever came of it. I don't know for sure what that man's intentions were, but I am certain he meant to harm me. I think I narrowly avoided an abduction. It makes me wonder just how many kids come across creeps like that and don't manage to escape. We only ever hear of the big, newsworthy abduction stories, but I'm sure kids get stolen on a pretty regular basis. TLDR. When I was a kid, some creep chased me home. My brother scared him away with the Irish equivalent of a baseball bat. On a totally unrelated note, when I was traveling the US many years later, I spent a night drinking with some friends in some dingy little bar in San Diego. I went to pee, and as I was sitting on the toilet, I looked down and see an eye looking at me through a mirror that's poking out underneath the partition between my cubicle and the one next to me. I was transfixed for a second before bolting out of there, having barely finished my piss. TLDR, some fudge pervert was watching me. Piss in a toilet in San Diego. Story 5. One time when I was a kid, my friend and I were out adventuring near a big factory in our city that was surrounded by tons and tons of trees that weren't cared for. My friend wanted to go on the tree grounds to look for lizards and cicadas, and I followed him around. We shuffled through trees and bushes. After a while, he said he noticed something inside a gap in a tree, so he picked up a stick to poke at the gap. I was on the other side of the tree. All of a sudden, I just heard him yell, "Super huge spider!" I turned around to face the tree, and along came this massive, quick as hell green, brownish-looking spider, the size and morphology just like a face-hugger from the Alien movies, that crawled in a spiral downwards the tree. Having never witnessed anything like that my whole life, I yelped like a little meanie at the sight of it and took off running as fast as I could, my friend right behind me. After a few seconds, he said, "Wait, let's go back to get a good look at it." But there was no way in hell I'd want to go anywhere near that thing. However, after much convincing, I agreed go to back, but only if we stay the hell away a good distance. So we found our way back to that tree. And that cursed thing is still hanging around there, staying unmoving, not even micro-movements. We tried to get the best look at it as we could while trying to stay at a safe distance. I remember that it had long legs just like the facehugger, just minus the tail. One strange thing about it was it had this white and pinkish-looking disc of flesh under its body that's wider than the body itself. My friend got a longer stick to poke at the thing and made it move a bit before it moved around to the other side of the tree, where we can't see it anymore. We would have to get closer to the tree in order to get to the other side of it, and frankly, at that point we were both too freaked out to do that, so we just booked it out of there. Later on, we told our other friends about it, and no one believed us. Edit. Spelling. Story 6. My dad is one of those completely serious types. I have hardly ever heard him laugh or crack a joke, so you pretty much take what he says seriously. Anyway, we were watching some random TV show, UFO Files or Ancient Aliens, and I asked him if he believed in UFO saliens. He proceeds to tell me a story I had never heard him tell before. Apparently, when he was a teenager, he and my great-grandmother were on their back porch one evening, very rural southern Mississippi in 70s, and noticed a huge object hovering over the woodline a few hundred yards from the house. Then suddenly it ascended vertically at an impossible speed. He said he couldn't explain what it was and hasn't seen anything like that since. Answer: my dad's like that too. He kids around but doesn't bullshoot stories. He told me a story about a creature he saw once. Something I believe was a skinwalker. This was in the very early 80s, in late fall, before I was born. My sister had come down from Toronto to visit with my parents. She left sometime a little after 9 p.m., but roughly 7-ish miles away from home, her car broke down. At least she broke down in front of a family friend's house, and they said she could use their phone. She called Dad, and he came down and picked her up. The friend said that she could just leave her car in the driveway until the next day. She decided to just stay at our parents' for the night and head out in the morning. As they're coming back home, it's now a little after 10 p.m. While driving through a particularly wooded spot, they heard a loud fudge inhuman scream. It was so loud it drowned out the radio, the engine, even their voices, for the split second it happened. Dad slammed on the brakes and they started freaking out at what the fudge was that noise, when suddenly something appeared at the edge of the car's lights on the side of the road. It was a coyote, at least 7 feet tall, and was walking on its hind legs and had a black-white striped tail. It walked across the road in front of the car. Then once it disappeared across the road, they heard that scream again, only far louder than the first time, and they got the fudge out of there. Story 7. My brother was diagnosed with cancer when he was 3. A few days after his diagnosis, I was sitting out in the living room with my parents, and he walked out of his room. He said that a man named Tony was floating in the corner of his room, eating peppers, and telling him that he was okay, and he was watching over him. Tony was my dad's grandfather, who died before we were born, and he loved eating peppers. It was really strange, as my dad never really talked about him, especially nothing detailed like eating peppers. My parents freaked out a bit. Story 8. I accidentally dug up a Voodoo Santeria bottle in a park by a tree. It had a pin doll, note, picture, and a bloody-looking liquid in it. Story 9. I've had a few strange experiences in my life, but here's one of the creepier ones I've personally had. My parents live in a house built in the 1760s on the coast of southern Maine. It's a center chimney cape with a long L off the back. When they first purchased the house, I did some research on the property and the owners through the years. The house was built by the Eaton family and was handed down through the family from generation to generation until about 1860 when it was sold. Between 1820 and 1830, the Eaton family lost both parents and 8 of the 9 children to premature passing. Most of them died of tuberculosis. I had returned home from college to stay with my parents during winter break. January in Maine is bitter cold, and in an 18th century house all the more so. My little sister, who was about 15 at the time, and I were sharing a bed, partially for warmth, partially because I'm a sissy and the darn old place has always creeped me out a bit. The bed was in a downstairs front room of the house. The only other person in the house at the time was my younger brother, who was in the back L, far across the house from us. I woke up around 8 a.m. rather abruptly because I could hear intensely labored breathing coming from my sister. At first, I thought she must have come down with a terrible cold and was really congested. I lay there for a couple minutes and then finally rolled over to check on her because it sounded awful, like an asthma attack or a passing rattle. When I rolled over, I immediately saw she was on her side facing me, wide-eyed. She whispered, "That's not you." The noise continued, and it was loud. There was nothing subtle about it, and it was coming from the bed, directly between us. We jumped out of bed, checked under the bed, checked the entire room, and the while the breathing continued. Finally, at a loss, we just stood on either side of the bed, facing each other, and listened in disbelief. It stopped abruptly. I have no explanation for that. My parents have owned the house for almost 10 years since then, and a variety of odd things have happened, though no one else has ever heard the labored breathing, which I rather think is just what it would sound like if, say, a person were dying of tuberculosis. Let me know if you guys would like to hear a few more stories about the house. I've got a bunch. Story 10. I've posted this before and it didn't get much attention. I may be a little late to this party too, but here it is. Edit. Sorry for the long read, but I really don't know how to shorten it without taking away from the story. It was the early 90s. 2 of my buddies and I were hanging out in our church parking lot late after church was over one night. It was pitch black save for the single street lamp in the middle of the parking lot. We were sitting in the back of Don's truck near the light. To my right was the external building that housed the kitchen. The church building also to my right. But a little bit behind me is attached to the kitchen by an open foyer. Behind both buildings is the multi-acre graveyard, with oldest graves over a century old. Beyond the graveyard is pasture land and woods. To my left, running in front of the buildings and parking lot, is the main country road with more open pasture land across the road. We were sitting there shooting shoot, just passing time and having a good time talking about random things under the sun. Suddenly, Jim shot a look into the blackness across the road and had a confused look on his face. We asked him what was up, and he said, "You guys didn't hear that?" He claimed he heard a deep growl in the distance somewhere in the pasture, so we sat in silence for a minute or so, listening intently. Nothing but the summer breeze through the oak trees could be heard. Don and I shrugged and jokingly accused Jim of making shoot up to scare us. Slowly, the conversation resumes and we think nothing more of it. Out of nowhere, both Don and Jim pop their heads in the direction of the pasture again. Don asked, "Is that what you heard?" Jim said yes. "I heard nothing and figured they must have gotten together when I wasn't paying attention." They described it as a deep growl with almost a bit of laughter. I just laughed it off myself, telling them to quit messing around. They both looked at each other, though, with a bit of a scared look. Why we didn't leave at that point, I don't know. But young stupid males ain't too bright. Again, we listened for a while, but heard nothing more than a cow mooing in the distance. Again, we go back to talking, but Dawn and Jim both keep bringing it up with each other, saying maybe it was a coyote or a cow or something. I thought the joke was getting old, so I kept trying to steer the conversation away to other, more important things like video games and women. But then we heard it. We all heard it. This deep, guttural, hellish, growling laugh echoed from the graveyard, though the foyer between the kitchen and church. Recalling the sound now brings the hair on my neck to attention. We all froze in fear for a few seconds, and without a word, we all jumped out of the truck, ran to our respective vehicles, and hightailed it out of there. I have no idea what it was. Someone playing a prank? Possibly, most likely, a sick coyote with a deep, darn voice. Unlikely, but maybe it was. Some sort of animal making sounds. A demon? Nah, surely not. But whatever it was, we have no idea what the fudge it actually was, because it scared us shitless. To this day, we still bring it up, occasionally. We call it the laughing growling thing because of how it sounded. Curiosity makes me wonder if we would have found out what it was if we had stayed. The deep recesses of my mind tell me I don't want to know. Story 11. The Mary Celeste is a pretty creepy one. So basically, this ship is found in the middle of the ocean with the entire crew missing, in seaworthy condition, crew's belongings and cargo untouched, and 6 months' worth of food and water still on board. None of the crew were ever heard from again. All around pretty creepy stuff. Story 12. So my granddad used to tell us this story because my brothers and I found it fascinating. I'll probably butcher a minor detail or two, but I'm pretty certain on a lot of it. I'll point out where I could be wrong. So, my granddad and his family grew up in rural Southern Ireland, so there, fields, moors, and rivers galore, and family all lived pretty near each other. There was an old tale that existed in the area that went something along the lines of, if you hear music coming from seemingly nowhere, leave. Someone is in danger. So my granddad and his brother Nicky were out on the moors when all of a sudden they both hear music, and they do not know where it was coming from. Naturally, following the tale, they left and returned home. When they got back, though, they found that their cousin, I think, was missing. Several days had passed, and there had been no trace of her. It was like she vanished. But one night, in a storm, she was suddenly at the door, soaking wet but seemingly unharmed. When people asked her where she was, she would only ever reply, "I was listening to the music." This is all she would respond with when asked about the whole situation, even up until the day she died. My granddad unfortunately passed away in December of 2013 to cancer, but his brother Nicky is still around, still living in Ireland, and he swears it to be true. You hear all the time about my cousin's aunt's brother, who is twice removed, having something happen to them, but something about having it happen to someone very close to you and then other people backing it up seems to really hit home. Answer: I grew up in the west of Ireland, and within sight of my bedroom window was a really old hill and a castle ruin. I remember being told as a kid that there was a fairy fort on top of the hill. Not pretty cute Tinkerbell-type fairies, but the scary dark kind typical of Irish folklore. And that sometimes people heard music, but you had to stay away and ignore it. Because if you were to go looking for the source, you would end up kidnapped by them and forced to attend whatever party they were having. which would seem like fun, but you'd end up losing all sense of time, and when they finally let you return home, decades would have passed, and everyone you had known would be old or dead. Irish folklore is the bomb.